Hello, and welcome back to the Just As I Am podcast. It is your favorite friend, Nicole, and today we are going to continue our study on the greatest king. We are going to finish talking about David, so stay tuned. Last week, we dove deep into 1 Samuel. Well, today we are going to be going through 2 Samuel, and I will warn you, it may take a minute. So, hopefully you have plenty of time. But last week we left off, I guess, with the prelude to David becoming the next king of Israel. We started in 1 Samuel, like I said, with Saul becoming the first king. And 1 Samuel ended with Saul committing suicide. It was not a pretty picture. Now we are going to pick up with David at the beginning of 2 Samuel. So I did somewhat actually do my research and figure out pronunciations. So maybe I will say them correctly this week, but you never know. No promises. So an Amalekite has come and told David that Saul had died, and he was the one who killed him, which we know that Saul killed himself, so that was not true. David and his men tore their clothes and started mourning. But then David asks this man, "Why weren't you afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" Then he had the man executed. So basically he's like, God chose Saul, or allowed, Saul to be king. Why would you dare kill him? And so he had the man killed. Following this, David writes and teaches a song of lament about Saul and Jonathan. Because remember, Jonathan was Saul's son, but he was also a friend and an ally to David. So at the beginning of chapter 2, David speaks with God and asks if he should go up to a town in Judah. And God tells him to go to Hebron, which is southwest of Jerusalem. So he goes, taking his wives and men and all of their families. When they get there, they anoint David over Judah. David finds out who buried Saul and sends some men to go bless them and let them know that he is the new king. So David was showing kindness to the men who ended up taking Saul's body and putting it to rest and not mistreating it like it had been. And this is where it starts to get a little crazy, okay? The commander of Saul's army takes Saul's last son and makes him king over everywhere but Judah. So basically, he says Saul was the king, so it's only right that Saul's son, next in line, is the king, but he doesn't make him king over Judah, which is where David is. And this naturally led to basically a civil war that lasted a long while and was very hands-on. And we'll leave it there. Although the longer it lasted, the better it was for David, because David grew stronger the longer this lasted, and Saul's people grew weaker. Now, in chapter 3, David becomes a dad, And he had 6 sons with 6 different women, so wives and concubines, which, wives is obviously when you're married to them, but concubines were women who were in a relationship but did not have that legality of a marriage, I guess. In verse 6 through 21, we can read about Saul's son and his commander, Abner, over one of Saul's concubines. This leads to Abner becoming Team David, basically. Abner messages David telling him that he can help grow his empire. David agrees to this, but wants his wife back. Remember Saul's daughter? How he was married to her at one point? Well, this is basically a power move and causes Michal's current husband great distress. He follows his wife as they're taking her to David, and he follows, just weeping and crying and in distress until they tell him to go home, and he does. Well, all of this sets up what happens next. David now has sent Abner away, and he left in peace, okay? No quarrel, no trouble, no nothing. When Joab and the men arrived and found out that he was gone, they spoke to David kind of like he was crazy. They were not understanding why David left this man. They were trying to tell David that he was going to go back and tell secrets like he was a spy. So these men lured Abner back, and there was Joab and his brother, okay? They pull him in like they're going to just privately talk with him, and these two brothers end up murdering Abner, and this was their revenge for Abner killing their brother in battle. When David found out, he was not a happy man and cursed their family. And in his curse, it was basically he was saying that someone in their family would always have some kind of illness or ailment or what have you. Well, David and his people buried Abner and mourned him. And this is followed by David's lament for Abner. When Saul's son, Ishbosheth, heard Abner died, he lost courage, and Israel started to freak. 2 of Ishbosheth's captains come into his house and they kill him, which we won't discuss all that, but they ended up taking his head to David, wanting a reward. And the response they get is very similar to the one that the messenger who brought the news of Saul to David got. They had it worse, though, because after this, they put Ishbosheth's head with Abner. Everyone is now coming together and officially makes David king over all of Israel, and they make a covenant with David. David was 30 years old at this time, so think about it. He was only between 13 and 17. He was only a teen when he fought Goliath, and now he's 30. So think about how long ago that was when all of that was decided, or coming about, I guess. David reigned over Israel for 40 years. Judah for 7.5. So he reigned over both for 33 years. I know that kind of doesn't make sense, but it does if you think about it. So he was ruler over just Judah for 7.5, and then he became king over all Israel. So that makes the 33. David takes his army and conquers Jerusalem and captures the fortress of Zion, making it the city of David. After all of this, he got a whole lot more, many more wives and concubines, and had many more children. Between all of these new wives, he had 11 more children. Word has now gotten to the Philistines that David is now a king, and they are not happy about it one bit whatsoever. So they come full force at David, but David is prepared. He asks God if he will deliver them into his hand, and God says yes, and David defeats them once again. They continue to come after Israel, but God continues to guide David in battle. So chapter 6 begins with David sending 30,000 men to bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. When some oxen stumble, I can't say words. Uzzah, anyways, took hold of the ark, and then God struck him dead, and this caused David to fear God. Eventually, the ark made its way to the city of David, and David celebrated by sacrificing burnt offerings and blessing the people and giving them gifts. David also danced wearing a linen ephod, which is essentially a cotton gown. My goodness. He did this with all of his might, and might I add, Michal, remember the first wife, then the not wife, then the wife again, she watched this and was not happy about it. She did not like what he was doing, and she voiced her thoughts to David, and he kind of somewhat dismissed her, and she ended up just not having any children because of it. So one day David talks to the prophet Nathan. He tells him how he doesn't like that he lives in a cedar house and the Ark of the Covenant is in a tent. Nathan talks with God, and God tells him to tell David that the ark has never had a cedar house. I mean, ever. Even since the people brought it out of Egypt. And God tells David that he will not be the one to build a house for God, but his offspring, so some of his kids. David continued to defeat other nations and became so great that other kings congratulated him. David wanted to show kindness to anyone left from Saul's household, and they found a servant of Saul's, and he told David Jonathan had a son who was lame in both feet, so he was not able to walk or anything. And they brought him to Saul. They brought him, and David gave him all of Saul's land back. So everything that Saul owned, he gave to this descendant. He told the servants to tend to it, because obviously he can't use his feet, he can't tend to it himself, and he allowed him to eat at the king's table with David, with him. The king of the Ammonites died, and David sends some men to show kindness to his son, the new king, but his men start drama, and they ended up humiliating the men and sending them back. And when I say drama, they tried to say that the men were coming to spy or something. They weren't coming for what they said. And as some people do, they believe everything that people tell them. David does not take this lightly and goes with his troops not only to defeat the Ammonites, but the Arameans for helping them. David kills thousands upon thousands of men during this war. Now, here is the story I'm sure we all know about. David and Bathsheba, okay? So David was upon his roof one evening when he looked over and spotted a beautiful woman bathing. So naturally, he wanted to know about her. forget about his wives and his concubines. He wanted to know about this woman. And his servant told him her name and that she was married and the important things, right? Well, at this moment, David was not worried about her husband because he had her brought up to him and then he slept with her. Ugh. Well, she ended up pregnant. And David had her husband come to him and they talked, and then David tried so hard to get this man to go home to his wife. But every time he tried, the man just would not budge. He would not go. And so things are, about to get obvious if secrets are about to show if the man didn't go home. And so to cover this up, David sent this man to the front lines. He sent him to the most dangerous part of the battle so that he would be killed. Once he died, he married Bathsheba and she had a son. And as we all guessed, this did not please God whatsoever. God did not like any of this happening. And in chapter 12, it begins with Nathan telling David basically a parable about a rich man and a poor one. So, long story short, the rich man had everything right, as a rich man does. And the poor man only had one sheep, and that sheep was like their family pet. It was a treasured possession. Well, the poor man goes to the rich man, and the rich man cooks the poor man's sheep. What an awful human being. Well, this, as it would tick you off, it made David angry too. And Nathan goes, "You are the rich man." And David was like, "What?" Well, Nathan scolded David for what he had done, and this led to David and Bathsheba's son getting very sick. He was sick for a long time, and he eventually died. And while the boy was sick, David mourned. He was, just depressed. But when he died, he was rejoicing and carrying on, and it confused everyone. Well, after this, he goes with Bathsheba, and they end up having another son named Solomon. Good old Solomon. Then David kind of goes off on a rampage and conquers land and takes other kings' crowns. It's very dramatic. In chapter 13, it doesn't get much better. Amnon has decided he wants his sister Tamar. And these are David's children, if you haven't gathered. He comes up with a way to kind of lure his sister to come to him, and then takes advantage of her. He is successful, but because she fought against him and tried to convince him not to do it and all the things, after the fact he hated her and he never wanted to see her again, basically. Well, this infuriates Absalom and David. So this infuriates one of the brothers and their dad, David. And this leads to Absalom having Amnon killed, and he ends up leaving home for a while. After Joab has, you could say, started the process to bring Absalom back, David allows it, and he allows him to come back with his family, but doesn't see his son's face for 2 years. Absalom and David don't see each other for 2 years after he comes back. And since Absalom has returned, he has been working to win the people over, and he has now 200 followers who he is going to have proclaim him as king of Hebron. This has David in tears. It's got him stressed. It's got our guy stressed. And David is losing loyalty by the minute, and he flees from Jerusalem, but not without leaving spies. Remember, David is very smart and strategic. So, on his way out, David just keeps running into trouble. Whether it is a family member of Saul or a servant of Saul's grandson, it's just all kinds of things. And it's really a roller coaster from there. Absalom seeks advice from, and I listen to this one and I will do my best, Ahithophel, maybe. But he also sees what Hushai thinks, since he is still on David's side. Well, Hushai, he's still on David's side. He's one of the spies that was left behind. He wants to see what he thinks, and he comes up with a plan that is somewhat the opposite of what Ahithophel says, but basically what it does is it's just going to give David more time. Well, Absalom chooses Hushai's advice, and Ahithophel commits suicide. I don't know why that is a last resort, but it is. David's army begins to battle Absalom's army, and many lives are lost. Absalom ends up getting stuck in an oak tree by his hair. As crazy as that sounds. He's riding his mule, and his hair gets caught on a branch, and he's just hanging there by his hair. Well, one of the soldiers reported that they had seen Absalom to Joab, and Joab asks why he didn't kill him. So he goes and takes care of Absalom. Him and a couple of other guys go and kill Absalom. And do you know why that man did not kill him when he saw him in the first place? It's because that was David's one rule for this battle. Do not kill Absalom. And now David is once again lamenting. David is returning to Jerusalem, and everyone is trying to clean their plates and fix their relationship with David. But Israel is still at odds. Everybody's trying to get back on David's good side for how they acted, but yet Israel is not united. With this, Sheba comes into play. And I'm not talking about the country, I'm talking about a person. So, Sheba comes in and is trying to start a rebellion. Amasa, who is now in charge of Joab, so Joab is his subordinate now or whatever, meets Joab in the street, where Joab then kills him in a very yucky way, I might add. Well, Sheba is then beheaded because of a wise woman, and the revolt ends. In chapter 21, there is a 3-year famine due to something that Saul did towards the Gideonites. David tries to straighten everything out, so he goes to him and he's like, what can I do to atone this? And they tell him if he brings them 7 of Saul's descendants that they can flay and bake and all the things, then they'll be even. Everything will be fine. And so David did just that, and then they had harvest. So the relentless Philistines are now trying again, but yet get defeated by David per usual. And David sings his praises because David was good at battle and he was good at music. That was his thing. 2 Samuel ends with David sinning, both, sinning and singing by taking a census of fighting men. He was told not to do that, and that is what he did. He is then given 3 options to atone for his sin, and ultimately he chooses a plague over his land. This plague was not a light plague either. It ended up killing 70,000 people. 70,000 of his citizens died because he chose the plague. But the other 2 options were not good options either. I'm just going to throw that out there. So David does in fact repent, and he ends up building an altar, and this is what ends the plague. I know this probably sounded a little bit all over the place and confusing, especially since I don't know how to say words, but you knew that already. But that's just really how the book of 2 Samuel goes. It doesn't have an easy storyline to follow. It goes here, there, and yonder. But as always, I encourage you to go and read it for yourself. This is just kind of like a side note, cliff note type thing. But a couple of things to know is we learned about Saul and we learned about David. Saul was the first king of Israel, but David was Israel's greatest king. And if you go and look in the Chronicles, you will find more about David, but it's more of the good side of David. It does not show his blemishes and faults as a human. So I hope you found this interesting. I hope you learned something. I hope I didn't bore you to death and I made enough sense for you. As always, thanks for listening, and I will catch y'all on the next one.